Did you know that a quarter of all the lies are said by just 1% of the population?
Okay,
So
you're thinking exactly what I'm thinking, right? Right. Why can't we do anything about them?
Yes.
Why do we have to keep doing that thing every 5 years for them? Not fair.
okay, I have no idea what he's talking about. But, so this explains
Huh.
why there are so many lies.
Huh.
But it also gives us an idea of how this
Wait,
can
did
be
you say
tackled.
a quarter of all the lies?
Yeah.
That seems like a fairly large number.
Yes. In fact, this concept is going to come back again and again, right? That a very large fraction of something is contributed by a very small number of the population, right?
Okay.
I mean, you must have heard of the Pareto law, right? Pareto principle, that 80% of the output is generated by 20% of the people.
Which kind of is seen in a lot of social networks, because the greatest number of followers are typically concentrated in those few
Yeah.
accounts like Barack Obama or Justin Bieber or
Yeah.
I don't even
So
know.
in
who it is.
general-
PewDiePie on YouTube. We need to get to the 10 million number. Subscribe.
Yeah.
I hate
So
saying that.
this concept is called a power law or a power law distribution. And today's episode, we are going to talk about what are all the different places in normal life that power laws start showing up, and how, if you're not careful about understanding power laws, you can make mistakes. Conversely, how if you understand power laws, you know how to use it to your advantage, right?
Okay.
Right?
Power laws.
Yes. So let's take an example of a social network.
The only power laws we know is the electricity going off in our house. Power laws. Sorry, bad joke. Continue. Example.
All right. So to give you an idea of where power laws come from, okay, we're going to take another toy example, right? Imagine I'm creating a social network, okay? Start with 100 of my friends and they know each other. And all
Naveen
that.
is on a very weird power trip and a toy trip. Matlab, recently we did an episode on the power of compounding. Now we are doing power laws, and now he's giving toys as toy examples, not toys as examples.
So toy examples are very important in understanding the world, okay?
Yes, thought experiments we call them in physics. Go on.
So I start a social network. It starts with say 100-ish people.
Okay.
And there each person connects to their friends.
Correct.
Now every new person that is added to this social network, okay, let's say they immediately connect to up to say 50 people, right?
Okay.
Some of them connect to 10, some to 20, some to 40, whatever. But each person whom they connect to is proportional to how many followers or friends connections that person already has. Seems quite reasonable, right?
Yeah.
As in, if somebody is very popular, more people are likely to connect to them, and somebody who's not very friendly, fewer people are likely to connect to them.
Or somebody who is introvert, not
Right.
necessarily not friendly, that also, yeah.
If you simulate this and then you grow it to 1 million people, and then if you count how many connections each person has and sort them in decreasing order of number of connections, right? What you will notice, what do you think the curve is going to be like, right? We're sorting by decreasing order of number of connections. Do you think it will be like a linear straight line going like this?
I have a feeling it won't be a
No.
straight line.
It is an exponentially decreasing curve, right?
There you go.
The first person will have a ridiculously high number of followers, like, probably 500,000. The next one will also have high, but it will be a sharp fall. It will not be like just 1 or 2 less than the top, right?
The 1%.
Right? The next one will also be another sharp fall, right? And there'll be like initially it will be a very steep fall, and then it starts flattening out. And then by the time you come to the end, it just seems to be going almost flat.
This is the reverse power of compounding. In the power of
Exactly.
compounding, we looked at the other direction. We started slow and grew fast. This is top and then slide down.
In fact,
Just graph wise, huh?
yeah, no, it's the same concept.
Okay.
Right? It's just we are looking at it in reverse, like you said. It occurs because of the same basic principles.
Accidental knowledge happened.
Yeah. So in power of compounding, we talked about how compounding happens when the growth at any stage is proportional to the size at that stage.
Correct.
Right? Where the growth is a percentage. So where the interest is a percentage of the principal itself, right?
Mathematics.
Same thing is happening in our social network, right? There is a person growth in how many connections a person gets is proportional to how many connections that person already has, right?
There is another name for this dynamic, and a
Yes.
name that I don't really like very much. The name that I've heard is the rich get richer.
Yeah, I mean, you might not like it, but
I don't.
everything in the world works on that principle.
That's why I don't.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, or whatever, right? I mean, in some cases,
We're
it
gonna have a
works
fight on this.
very well. In some cases, it is very bad. But because whenever there is a rich get richer dynamic in how a complex system grows, you will end up with a situation where some metric that you are measuring, if you add it all up and then you sort by decreasing order of that metric, you will find that there is a power law.
There's a very distinct power law.
By power law, what it simply means is that the curve that forms is an exponential decay. Mathematically, it is a raised to minus x, etc. That's why it is called a power law.
Okay.
Right? But we are not going to talk about the mathematics. Okay. Today we are going to talk about what it means in
in
what
our
it means
daily
to
lives,
you
yeah.
in your daily life and what are the implications of a power law. But before, I wanted to impress on you that it occurs very naturally as a result of very reasonable
Well, it's not always
steps.
all natural. There are some artificial situations also where the power law is kind of
Right.
created as a result of situations.
Right. So just to give examples, right? Wealth distribution is a power law. Okay. If you look at the richest person, second richest person, third richest person, it will be a power law. Right?
It actually is true. So
income distribution is a different power law.
Yeah.
If you look at just populations, right? Populations of different countries, China, India, US, so on, right? That is a power law. If you look at populations within a country, like populations of cities and towns and villages, you will notice that there is a power law. There will be a few cities like with ridiculously high populations, and then after that it falls sharply.
Delhi, Mumbai,
Within a city,
Chennai, Kolkata.
within a city, if you look at populations of different areas of this pockets of the city, you will notice there's a power law there also, right?
Okay.
So that is in fact one of the important properties of anything depending on a power law.
And
It
now
is
that you mention
scale-free.
it, the concept of the rich getting richer applies to each one of these examples
Levels.
that you mentioned, because cities keep growing exponentially in size because there are already lots of people, then more people come and then it keeps growing, whereas a smaller town or a village might not get as many people coming and settling there for multiple reasons. That
And Aund is a hot area, that's why more people want to stay in Aund. And because there are lots of people in Aund, there are lots of services, there are lots of shops, there everything is there, so then more people want to stay.
So it's a cycle.
Whereas if you go like outside to an empty area, very few people stay there, so nobody wants to stay there, right? So it's a power law up there.
Eventually there will be people staying there, but it's a slow growth there.
Exactly.
So this is where you have to look at the other episode, which is the power of compounding on how. But anyway, we are talking about the power law here.
So the other important thing here that you noticed was that the whole thing looks very similar at different levels.
Correct.
Right? World, country, city, etc. So in fact, this might remind you of fractals, right?
Yes.
Self-similar. And that is one of the important characteristics of anything that is described by a power law, right? If you look at a social network, the entire social network will look very similar to if you look at a smaller pocket of it, just that social network within, say, India or within Pune, or if you just take a subset of only the maths geeks in a social network, that will have its own smaller power law, right?
Okay.
So
Fair.
it appears in other places also, right? If you look at the number of, say, if you look at a large WhatsApp group, right? And you look at how many people are posting bad posts, right? Like offensive.
It's usually
bad
one or two. It's literally usually 1, 2, or maybe like a small group of idiots.
Right. In fact, if you just count the number of bad posts
Huh.
by person, and then you sort it in decreasing order, you will see a power law coming.
That
Right?
makes me wonder why admins don't kick
If
out
you
those
look at
people.
traffic offenders in a city,
Huh.
you'll notice there will be a power law there, right? If you get
Wait,
look at
traffic offenders power law, how does that work? Like all of or a major chunk of the traffic offenses are caused by one person or one
no,
set
no,
of
a small number, a much smaller number, right? Again, 80-20 rule you call, right? 80% of the offenses will probably be by 20% of the people.
So
and
why
50%
not-
will be by 1%. or
why
so
not
on.
take away their driving licenses and make sure that they never drive on the roads again?
In fact, that is one of the ways in which you use a power law.
Okay.
Which is that whenever something is power law distributed,
Huh.
it is not, and you want to stop that behavior.
Huh.
It is not necessary to catch and punish everybody. You just take a small fraction of the top guys and you shut them down. That results in two things. One is that it gets rid of a lot of the volume entirely, and it serves as an example for the others. So,
Can we just clip this little part, this little explanation by Naveen and send it to everywhere where the power law is harmful to humanity? Like
Yes.
everywhere. Traffic offenders, liars, rich getting richer.
yes. So, for example, if you are running a large WhatsApp group, right? All you have to do is that those few people who are doing most of the, say, rude posts, right? You scold them one or two times, maybe kick out one or two of them, and after that the group is going to be very well behaved, right? There is actual studies of this on things like Reddit, right? Where you see that a lot of the offensive behavior comes from a very tiny fraction of the posters and moderators of groups where they clamp down on this behavior quickly. Very soon the whole thing settles down into good behavior, right? So the good thing about the power law is that the amount of effort needed to improve things is much smaller than what you would think just by looking at the size, right? Conversely, power law, right? You said this is a power law, it goes in reverse also, right?
Huh.
So if you don't shut down that 1%, they can quickly overwhelm everything and they can also infect other people, and they can end up creating a culture of bad behavior, right? So it has to be done early and it has to be done consistently.
This reminds me of a lot of things from a time when I was not doing this.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
let's not go there.
Yeah.
But this example that you gave is applicable in so many scenarios. So
Yeah.
what you're essentially saying is if you let the people who are being nasty on WhatsApp continue being nasty,
Right.
then that will infect the
Other people.
So
Yes.
it's the one bad apple in a bunch
Yes.
example that
Yes.
applies here.
Right.
Oh.
Although these behaviors are infectious, and the number of new people who start behaving badly will be proportional to the number of people behaving badly currently, and that is a power of compounding. It can take over everything. So be careful.
I know.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm thinking. How do I know when a power law is applicable and when probably a different kind of distribution is applicable? Because
Yeah.
not everything will be
It's a power law,
distributed
yeah.
in a power law distribution.
So, in fact, this is a very important point that you brought up, right?
Okay.
There are two distributions in nature which are very important. One is power law, but even more important than a power law is the normal distribution, otherwise known as
The bell curve.
the bell curve, right? If you look at IQs in the general population, they are distributed as a bell curve.
Correct.
100, IQ 100 is average, and that is the maximum.
Correct.
And then as IQ goes up or goes down, the number of people reduces, right?
Under that, yeah.
If you
with
look
that
at, say, heights of people, that's also a normal distribution, right?
Correct.
So whenever there is something in nature where there is sort of a mean behavior and variation from the mean is not common, right? That is a normal distribution. Basically, if there is no rich get richer dynamic going on
Right,
there.
because I can't get height from anywhere. It is
Yeah.
basically something that is inherent in me, or I can't get IQ from anywhere.
In fact, let us get into that a little bit more, right? A lot of people are under the impression that if two parents are very high IQ, then the child is going to be even higher IQ, right? That's not at all true, right? If you look at some of the smartest people in history and try to think of their children, most of them you've never heard of, right? That's because IQs do not have a rich get richer dynamic.
So
They
what,
have
your
a-
family is an outlier? Throw him for a loop. Naveen's entire family is intelligent, in case you didn't know. You should listen to the other members of the family and get a sense of their smartness. The entire family, like, this is a proper outlier in his example.
Yeah. So the point is that in most of these cases there is reversion to the mean, right? If you take a high IQ person and go down, say, 3 generations from there, you will end up with normal IQs, right? So that's why
Average
IQs are normally distributed. But when there is a rich get richer dynamic, then you will get a power law distribution. So you have to know, either you have to know or you have to just study it and do some measurements to understand if this is a power law or normally distributed thing, right?
So, how do I spot a power law if I can spot a power law? Is there a way to
See, in general, try to think of, does looking at average make sense here or not? Okay, if I look at a class and I ask what are the average marks in this class, that makes sense. Very likely the marks are going to be bell curve distributed, right? If I
or
take
performance in an office, again a bell curve distribution, there will be excellent people, there will be people who are slackers, and most of the people are average. But the income, the salaries being paid out.
If I take a look at, say, a bar, right, and the incomes in that bar, the average doesn't really make sense, because if Bill Gates walks into that bar, then the average person in the bar is now a billionaire. Right?
Average.
Right? So their average doesn't make sense because the upper end doesn't really have a limit.
Correct.
Right? It could be million, it could be 10 million, it could be 100 million, it could be a billion, it could be 100 billion, even 100 billion doesn't seem to be the limit, right?
So that's the key.
So there, wealth and income is power laws, right?
Correct.
In fact, if you plot, that's where we get this problem, right? Which is that, let me talk in terms of the 80-20 rule, where we said that, 80% of revenues come from 20% of the customer.
Correct.
Similarly, what you will see is that 80% of the income in a country will come from 20%. Now, of course, this is not a hard and fast rule. It varies a little bit, but because wealth and income are power laws, what you will find is that in every country in the world, the top 1% will have quite a large fraction of the income.
They do.
And just that number by itself, like if I just say that the top 1% in India get about 20% of the income, right? That number by itself doesn't tell you anything. You have to look at it in comparison. Is it good or bad compared to other countries?
Correct. It's an indicator. It's a measure.
More important, you have to see, has it been increasing in the last few years or decreasing, right? That is more important, because that number by itself, humans are not good at intuitively understanding things related to power laws.
There is a threshold, and this is a discussion that Naveen and I keep having off camera also. My contention is that there is a number at which, or there is a specific threshold at which top X have Y% starts beginning to matter. Naveen's contention is that it matters when you take into account other factors related to that particular statistic or to that particular measure or indicator.
Yeah, what I am trying to say is that just that number by itself doesn't really give you a deep understanding of how bad this is, right?
It doesn't. It but we can't ignore that number either.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we should ignore that number. I'm just saying that that number has to be put in context. You have to give much more data for that number to make sense, right? Because whenever there is a power law, you are going to get ridiculous numbers like this, right? 1% of the people are responsible for 25% of the lies, right? That just seems, right?
Yeah,
but then again, 1% of people are getting 20% of the income, the same number, because it came from the same power law.
Correct.
Right?
No, I think a lot of the times when you read, say, headlines like this or reports like this, they are basically meant to attract attention in a somewhat clickbaity way. For example, we might title this video, 1% of the people will watch 80% of this video, 99% won't watch beyond the first 3 minutes, and it will get your attention.
Yeah.
It works. What the eventual result of it is that you reach this point and you heard all about the power law, and now you're thinking where power law applies in your life. So it works, right?
So I think, you would argue that when it is used to point out inequality, it's a good thing. Let me give examples where it's a bad thing, right?
Please.
Let's look at stocks.
Okay.
If there is a person who has, say, 30 or 50 stocks that they have bought over the last 10 years, right? Now, if you look at the return on each of these stocks and then you sort it by decreasing order of returns, this is going to be a power law, right?
Yeah.
There is a rich gets richer dynamic here. There is an unlimited upside here. So it will be a power law.
Correct.
Now, what this person can do is, no matter what that portfolio is, the top 3 stocks will have performed like crazy.
Correct.
And if this person talks about just those stocks, they will look like a genius of investing. And most likely that person actually believes that himself. It's usually a he when he believes this. And this person believes he's a genius in investing because he knows there are 3 stocks which give ridiculously high returns compared to the stock market. Because it's a power law, it's always easy to come up with examples
you're
like
very
this.
close to being misandrist, Naveen. Be very, very careful.
Well, I don't know women who go around boasting like this, but there are men who do, okay? So...
Fine. Please take it as a joke. All of this is meant as a joke. Nothing serious. No misandry, no misogyny here.
Yeah.
This was purely a joke.
But, so for example, whenever people are talking about stocks, always they talk about these examples without really talking about the full portfolio.
Right.
In fact, most of these people don't even actually do that analysis themselves as to how their entire portfolio did, right? And that's where a power law trips you up. I'll give another fun example related to stocks. Right?
Please, we need one.
Pick one of those top stocks, right? Like performed like crazy, right? Say 20 years ago, you bought TCS stock. Right?
Or 20 months ago, you bought GameStop.
Yeah. So, again, there are studies which show that if you take just the daily returns of the stock, right? And you plot the daily returns in decreasing order of return. Again, you will see a power law. Most days the stock didn't do anything interesting, and there were a few days where there were like these big jumps. And
isn't that what day traders are essentially trying to do? Time those jumps so they don't have to remain invested for the other days when it doesn't do anything.
But it's a power law, which means that this is really, really small number.
So the smarter thing to do is to stay invested.
Yes. Power of compounding works best when you are there for a long time consistent. But keep in mind that, for example, if in any important stock like this, if you missed the top 10 or 15 biggest daily jumps, you would have not made any reasonable amount of money at all, right? You would have probably underperformed the stock market. And this is for a stock which did like amazing returns. So power laws trip you up in funny ways, and you have to be careful.
Very, very careful.
To put it differently, it is very easy to come up with clickbaity headlines and genius sounding numbers when there is a power law involved. What you have to do is dig deeper and look at the overall picture, not just the top N.
The digging deeper is to something we recommend all the time.
Yeah.
There is a reason this is FutureIQ.
Yeah.
But yes, so let's take a look at, or let's try and talk about how not to get tripped by power law.
Yeah.
One example you've already given in terms of curtailing the nastiness of the most powerful users,
Correct, yeah.
top users in a WhatsApp community if they are becoming rude and
Typically,
nasty.
in bad behaviors in various situations, like group situations, is a power law. And what that means is that a small fraction of users are responsible for most of the bad behavior. Shut them down before they infect everybody else.
That's one way of kind of combating the power law. What are the other ways?
Another one is to keep in mind that if there is a power law, average is not a great measure, right? We gave the example of Bill Gates in a bar.
Yeah.
So one of the thing, averages make most sense when there is a bell curve, a normal distribution. There, the average in the middle is also the same as the most common number, right? Whereas with a power law, an average is just going to throw you. So remember, there you probably want to ask for a median, right? I'll give you an example from right this week. There was a report going around where they analyzed the number of books that people read in an year, and there the average was 12. Right? And all of you are like sitting there and thinking, oh shit, right?
I am 3 books behind.
I didn't read 12 books and I'm now very below average. Right?
Yeah.
The problem is that there are some people who are so crazy, they read a ridiculously high number of books.
Yeah.
So the number of books read is a power law.
Oh.
Okay. Smart. And that's why if you look at the average there,
it's a wrong measure.
Yeah. The median is 4 books. That makes you feel much better, I hope.
Much better, because that means I can read a book every 3 months and I still have about, I don't know how many days to finish this book.
So not just average, anytime you see a statistic where it's saying, the top X% have or control or something, such a huge fraction of everything, remember there is a power law going on. You need to dig deeper, look at better numbers.
Better numbers, better
data.
Don't
base your decisions or thought process on just that top X% number. Right?
Yeah. I personally believe that there is something there for you to consider, but what that number is telling you to directly consider is not exactly the thing you should be considering.
Most importantly, something that applies to you in your daily life. I would call it the power law of effort. Okay. That let's take the example that Tim Ferriss gives in his book, The 4-Hour Chef.
Okay.
He says you can become a really high quality chef in 4 hours, right? And to do that, what he does is that he talks to a bunch of chefs, okay, and tries to understand from them which are the most important things to learn to be a master chef, right? And
not the series, but the person.
And what he has realized is that there is a power law there, right?
Okay.
To give a simpler example, you're trying to learn a language, right? If you look at all the words in English and you order them by frequency of how often they're used, that's a power law. Okay. Some of you might have heard it as a Zipfian distribution, because Zip was a mathematician who found this, or linguist maybe. But that's just one example of a power law, right? Which means that if you take the top N words or top N phrases and learn those, you will have learned quite a large fraction of the actual language being spoken, right?
Time to learn a few new languages, I guess.
In fact, Tim Ferriss does that, and he's described it in that book. Similar concept applies to becoming a high quality chef.
This requires that somebody do that initial work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you can't just randomly go and learn random things, right? You have to get that distribution first. Tim Ferriss has described it in his book. Take a look. But it involves talking to the experts and finding out.
What's the book called again?
The 4-Hour Chef, right?
Check it out.
More generally, power law works for any kind of learning, right? I mean, if you talk in terms of the 80-20 distribution, learning 80% of something is going to take just 20% of the time.
Correct.
right?
Correct.
It's only that you want to go from 80 to 90, 90 to 95, 95 to 99. That takes an increasing amount of time. So if that is not your aim, then you can learn something very quickly if you pick the right things to learn at the beginning based on the power law, right?
So I'll have to go and look at language learning apps that will do this 80% extraction for me.
Yeah.
And then probably learn a couple of languages this year. I'm going to try. I'm definitely going to try. But I
Yes.
wonder if there are any apps like that. If you know
Yeah.
of any of those apps, please tell us in the
So
comments.
another place where power law of effort would apply is, say, in your company, some business, right? 80% of the revenue comes from 20% of the customers, so you want to focus on that. 80% of the complaints come from 24% of the customers, so you want to try to get rid of those customers. Don't fire those customers, but use pricing tricks to get rid of them. We have done an episode on pricing. Take a look at that. Everything you know about pricing is wrong, I think we called it.
Yes. And
yeah.
it was a fun episode that you should definitely check out.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that basically sums up everything that we have to discuss about power law today. If you have any questions, any doubts, any additional thoughts, please feel free to send them to us either via comments or on our Twitter. But this is... wait, didn't we do an episode on something similar with numbers and digits?
Whenever there is a power law involving numbers, so for example, the number of people who voted for the first candidate versus second candidate versus third candidate.
Yeah, I remember this example.
That would be a power law. Number of people who applied insurance payouts will be a power law. And what that means, because humans are not good at understanding power laws, it means that when somebody tries to commit fraud, they end up doing a normal distribution or a uniform distribution when it should have been a power law, and then the numbers look wrong. We did it in an episode called Benford's Law, which gives you a very simple method of finding fraud. We didn't explain it at that time, but now is the right time. That comes from the power law. Keep in mind that human abilities are normally distributed, but the outcomes based on those abilities are power law distributed, right? Which means that effort you put in is always going to be linear, right? I mean, in 1 month you can only put in maximum 1 month of effort, right?
Correct.
But what you get out of it can be a power law distribution, right? So remember, karmanyavadikaraste.
There we go again. That's like the mantra to Naveen's life. Karmanyavadikaraste.
Oh, absolutely.
Ma phaleshu kadachana. So I think it would be a good time to go to that episode, check that out, and then combine both these learnings and take away an additional learning with you. And while you do that, we will go and take some water to drink. Srikanth, Naveen, FutureIQ.
Thank you for watching till the end. If you liked this episode, check out these others. You might like them also. And please share with your friends. I'm sure they will also like these.